Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Olivia. I am one of the TAs for Information Systems. A few of you sections will be missing next Monday because of Labor Day. And in an attempt to not let anyone get behind, I am just recording what I will cover in lab on Monday, and that way you can review it at your own pace. And if you have any questions, just let me or your TA know. So let's get into it. So today we'll be talking about Access. Microsoft Access is essentially just an easy, inexpensive database software that can be used for building databases and then querying them, other functionality as well. It's a great place to learn the fundamentals. So first, let's just look at how we actually get into an Access file. So I actually have mine pinned to the start here, but otherwise you could search it. It is on all of the university computers. So here I'm just going to double click it and I should get this. And so then I'll just click once to get a blank database. And then you want to make sure you save this somewhere where you can access it again. For my sake, I'm just creating this to throw it away, but if you were to use this as an example, or let's say, for example, you're doing your homework, you want to make sure you save this on your H drive, because if you don't save it there on the school computers, you won't have it anymore after the end of the day. They actually clear all of the local memory at the end of each day. So you want to make sure to save it on your H drive. Then we can go ahead and go to create. It doesn't, for my sake, it doesn't really matter what I'm naming this, but do try to name it something that makes sense if you're turning in homework. Usually it will tell you what to name your file. So we'll create that. So let's just talk about what a table itself is. I know a lot of you probably already have some understanding of what a table is made up of, but just so we're on the same page, a table is made up of fields and records of information about generally one particular topic. So that could be maybe for a school you have a database that has a table of students and maybe a table of teachers, maybe a table of courses, that sort of thing. And then, so let's kind of break that down. So, fields and records. A field is an individual attribute about that thing. So, maybe the student's first name or the student's address. And then a record is the collection of all fields referring to a single thing. So, the record might be your first name, your student ID, your last name, your address, and whatever other information specifically about you as a student. So now that we have that down, let's just kind of cover some of the basics of Access. So when you initially open it, you get this kind of view. You always end up starting with this first table, and you can just close out of it if you want to. I'm going to keep it up because I'll show you a couple things, but you definitely don't need to use that if you don't want to. The first thing I'm going to show you is the navigation pane. So that is this part here. The navigation pane defaults to having all access objects. That is just what it sounds like. So any items or objects that you're using within Access, queries, what have you, they will all show up here. You can narrow that down by going to this drop-down menu, and that would give you the queries specifically, maybe your table specifically, whatever you're looking for. So that's the navigation pane. Um, let's look at the Home tab. One more thing before we go there. So the File tab, you want to be careful that if you've already named your database, you do not want to go to Save As and move it somewhere else. So it's fine if you're in the same location, I believe, but I know it's kind of a bug in their system that if you try to save within a different directory, you can actually corrupt your file. So what we would rather have you do is save your current file, close out of it, and then you will just copy and paste your file to the new directory. A little bit weird, but that's what we'd recommend to just avoid it corrupting. The Home tab here we'll get to next. So a few things with that. you have your kind of obvious standard Microsoft Office text editing kind of stuff here, fonts, bold, whatever, coloring. But the main thing that I want to talk about is the different views. So this becomes very, very important. So if we have a table here, with no data in it, no structure yet, but you have two different views. So the first view and the view that we're on right now, we call that data sheet view. And eventually, if you had data in it, this is a view where you'll actually see your data itself. So you'll see those individual records made up of the fields. But then you can go drop down to this view. You can either do it up here or you can do it down in the bottom corner. You can toggle. You can go to the drop down menu and then go to design view. It'll prompt you to name your table, that's fine. And this is where you actually define the names of your fields. So that's the specific things like my name of my field might be student first name, student last name, student address, whatever. And my data type is whatever that happens to be. So let's look at some of these. Auto number is just what it sounds like. It automatically generates a number. We might have short text, long text. That's just basically how much memory you allocate for text. Number, small or large. In this course, you will just be using the normal short text, the normal number. Date time is one that you'll probably be familiar with. Currency, yes, no, it's kind of like a Boolean value, so it's either yes or no or true or false, that sort of thing. The rest of these I don't think you'll really use in this course, but a lot of options. Okay, so then third tab here, we have the Create tab. Here, I think the two main things that you'll use for this course are tables. So you can either start by creating a table in datasheet view, so the view where you see all of the data with this button. Otherwise, you can start in design view with this button. Either way is totally fine. The other thing that I think you'll use quite a bit in this class is this queries area. So to create a new query, it's under the Create tab and then under Queries. The next tab we'll look at, and we'll talk about most of these later in the semester a little bit more in depth, but the External Data tab is, again, just what it sounds like, taking data from an external source, so whether that be another database, the web, maybe Excel, whatever that looks like. Finally, we get to database tools. From here, we can define our relationships within the database. And yeah, we'll get more into that in a little bit as well. All right, awesome. So now that we have that all done, let's talk a little bit about an example little database that we'll create. So I'm going to exit out of this because we don't need it. One thing to note about this program is you need to have any object closed before you can rename it or delete it. So now that it's closed, I can right click on it and just go to delete and get rid of that so that we can start fresh. So the data we're working with, and this is on Icon, we basically have two different sheets, one with students and some information about them, and one with their majors and information about that. So let's go through each thing here. So we have a student ID, a student name, a total GPA, a total credits, and a major ID. And then within the majors table, we have the major ID and the major name. Now notice that we have the data type next to all of these in parentheses. This isn't always given, but if it is given, you want to follow it. So if it's not given, you kind of have to infer a little bit. But here we're told that the student ID is text, student name is text, the total GPA is going to have 2 decimal places and be a number. Total credits is going to be a number with no decimal places, and the major ID is going to be text. Now, the other thing that we're told here is that the student ID is the primary key. So let's talk about primary keys a little bit. So that's going to be a unique identifier of your data within your table. So you will not ever see that repeat. So for example, we have Junior Smith here in the first row. We will never see a second Junior Smith because it's uniquely identifying that row. So we can find that row based on that ID. Same thing with majors here. So we have major ID is text, major name is text, And then we see that major ID is a primary key, so we won't see any of those numbers repeat because they are uniquely identifying a major. And the last thing I want to point out is that we can see the connection between major ID in both different spreadsheets. So this kind of shows us that we have a relationship here, that students are taking coursework towards majors. This one's pretty obvious, but sometimes it could be a little bit tricky to see the relationships. Um, and you can see that every student here has a major. It would depend on our business rules whether we require this to have a field or if maybe like how you would handle if a student hasn't declared a major yet. And then you would assume that multiple students could belong to the same major, so this doesn't have to be unique. So just a couple things to point out there. Okay, so let's look at how we can bring this into Access. So if we bring up the Access window again, what we can actually do is, if you remember under the Create tab, we can create a new table. So I'm going to do just that. So you can go to either one. Again, I like to just start with table design, but either one works. And then I'm going to split screen this. Okay, great. And then I'm going to create the majors table first, just since it's a little bit more simple. So we have the major ID. And I'm going to do something weird here just to kind of show you. And then that will be text. So a couple other things that we can now note here. So you get down here some more specific things about that data type. Some of these maybe don't matter for you. They might matter in a particular project, but one thing I am going to encourage you to do is reduce the field size. So be generous with this, but just note the fact that you're doing it for a reason. So the reason you reduce it is to save allocated memory. So the field size here is 255. We can probably reduce that down to, let's say, like 5. And yeah, and then we know that that's a primary key. How we set it as a primary key is we just click in this gray area, and then primary key will be activated here. So we can click on that, and you see a little key show up. So we know that that's our primary key. The next thing that we're going to enter is the major name. So just like we did before. And then again, that data type is short text, which is totally fine. I'm going to set that to 30 for the field size, and that should be more than enough. Okay, so then how do we get data in here? So we can change our view again to where we can see the actual data. It'll prompt me to save, and I can say yes. And I'm going to just save this as something that would be obvious to someone who saw the table what it contains. So majors would be a good option. Click OK. Okay, and then we have our table with no data in it yet. For this one, I'm just going to have you guys manually enter the data, and then I'll show you a little bit different of a way to do it, a little quicker way to do it for the next table. So here, major ID, we have 1, major name, MIS. 2, finance, and so on and so forth. But as you can see, this method I wouldn't recommend unless you're adding just an individual record. It can get to be an easy place to have a typo. So I wouldn't recommend it unless it makes sense for your use case. So we have that. We're going to save it. And then I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that, and we'll create our next one. So switching this over to students. And then we can just kind of move this over so we'll see everything. Can just scroll as we need to. So again, we go to Create, Table Design, and then we just put in all of our field names. We also call these attributes. Either way is totally fine. So student ID, data type there is short text, and then I don't know, we'd probably put that, let's say 25. That's completely arbitrary. Whatever you want to put it at is totally fine. As long as it holds your data with a little bit of extra room is perfect. And it depends on your use case on how strict you need to be on that. So we'll set that as primary key. Again, just clicking next to it and selecting primary key. And then student name is the next one. And that is short text. So let's say we give that, oh, I don't know, 50. It really doesn't matter. Um, the next one is total GPA. This one is a little bit different from what we've seen so far, so everything has mostly been text. This one will actually be a number. So again, we have this drop down for all of our different data types. We'll select number there. The next thing I would do is go down to decimal, and then we can set both the scale and the decimal places to 2. Here you can kind of change this, so they were a little bit vague with this, but you can kind of make it look however is convenient for whatever your output is going to be or whatever analysis you're doing. Here I'm just going to have it display decimal places if there are decimal places, otherwise I'm just going to have it round there is what this should do. And great. Okay, so then let's put the next one. You could also, it isn't necessary for anything we're doing right now, but you can go to the property sheet here if you want to get even more specific, and that should give you some options to do so. Okay, and then I'm just going to scroll over here quick. Okay, total credits. Okay, and then the data type there again is a number. And we can just put that right at integer. That should be fine. And then major ID. And let's see what we set that as. So you always want to set, if you're you have 2 things that are the same, you want to make sure that they are the same data type and the same field size if they're short text. They don't necessarily need to have the same name, that doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that they're the same size. So here I have that at 5 and it's short text, so I'll want to make sure it's the same thing. So short text and 5. Again, that number 5 was completely arbitrary, so whatever works for you there, no big deal. Okay, and so now we have both tables, which is great. We'll save this one as students. And our next step here will be to form a relationship. So, actually, our next step will be to add data to this table. I almost forgot. So here you can see that we have all of our fields. What I'm going to show you how to do is just copy and paste that data. It can be quite a bit faster. So the trick here is you want to just select the data itself. Just make sure you don't select the headings because otherwise it'll just copy over as a record in your table. It might not even let you copy it because some of these things don't match the data type. So for example, the total GPA, this heading isn't a number, so it wouldn't let you copy that over. So how you do this, once you've copied it, you just click on this little star, and then you just, boop, that didn't work. Let's see if I got everything. I'm just going to try to copy that one more time. Okay, and then select. Perfect. And it tells me I'm about to paste 5 records. That is great. We'll paste those. Sometimes here it'll tell you that you have a paste error. That would just mean that you have duplicates somewhere and it will remove the duplicates. So don't worry about that if that happens. It'll actually show you what it removes as well. So no big deal. So now that we have data in both of our tables, we can go ahead and form the relationship. So the relationship here, again, is between students. The students table, we have the major ID, and the majors table, we have the major ID, kind of associating students with a major. So we can just go ahead and exit out of those. And then we'll go to database tools here and click on relationships. Then we'll add both of our tables. You can either double click or highlight it and then press add. Either way works. And then you can either close it or use the X, whatever. Okay, And now, so let's talk about something. So we know that major ID is a primary identifier of a major, so we call that the primary key, and it's going to be unique there. Um, Major ID in the students table we call a foreign key because it's not a primary identifier of that table. So um, having the major doesn't tell us what record it is because multiple students might have the same major, right? So that can't uniquely identify that record. However, it is a primary key in another table, and we're directly referring to it. So this is a primary key. This is a foreign key. In Access, we always, to create a relationship, we drag and drop from primary key to foreign key. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So drag and drop. Okay, and that will tell us that we're coming from the majors table with major ID to the students table with major ID. And then I always click the first two here. So enforce referential integrity. What that means is that if I'm referring to a major in the students table, so I'm saying Sally has major 1, then major 1 has to exist in the majors table. So we can't just put like a random value there unless it exists in the major table. It will have an error. And then cascade update would just say, let's actually do both of these, cascade update or cascade delete. That actually just means that if I'm going to change something in one place, I'm going to change it in both. Or many, let's say if we use major ID multiple times, if we updated it, we would update it everywhere. So let's create that. Cool. And then I don't know if you guys can see this, but you can see that students here are associated with one and only one major, and then majors can be associated with many students, is what we can read from that. Awesome. Okay, so that's all I actually have to go over today. One last thing that I want to talk about is the next week of lab, so week 3. You will have a quiz over the chapter 5 reading, so just make sure you do that. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Have a great day off.